The black nanny put the millionaire's daughter in the bathtub. Then he screamed. The little girl squealed as a spoonful of mashed carrots danced just out of her reach, her tiny hands clapping together in laughter. The young black nanny leaned closer, coaxing her with a patient smile, her voice gentle as she guided the food to the child's mouth. This was their nightly rhythm, a rhythm that had become the heartbeat of the mansion itself. In the dining hall, chandeliers glittered above polished marble floors, but the laughter in the nursery was the only sound that felt alive. When the meal was done, the nanny wiped the girl's face carefully, humming a tune that had been passed down from her own mother. The girl's dark curls bounced as she nodded along, eyes wide with trust. She slid from her chair and ran straight into the nanny's arms, ignoring the stern instructions her father had barked earlier about eating properly and behaving like a young lady. To the girl, none of that mattered. What mattered was the warmth in the arms that lifted her, the steady voice that told her stories, the quiet presence that never made her feel alone. They moved next into playtime, a ritual the nanny guarded fiercely, even when the clock ticked later than it should. Wooden blocks stacked and toppled, picture books sprawled across the nursery carpet, and giggles echoed through the hall like music that the millionaire never stopped to hear. Sometimes the nanny caught glimpses of the father's shadow lingering in the doorway, but he never stayed long. Business calls and obligations always seemed louder than his daughter's laughter. When playtime ended, the nanny began the careful transition to bedtime. She gathered the little girl into her lap and brushed her hair with slow strokes, the bristles gliding through tangles while the child leaned against her chest. The millionaire's home was full of fine things, but nothing in its countless rooms brought the girl comfort like the steady heartbeat beneath the nanny's uniform. She whispered secrets sometimes, soft admissions of fears and dreams only a child could voice. And the nanny, though just an employee in the eyes of the household, listened as if every word mattered more than diamonds. Finally came the bath, the part of the evening that always made the girl squeal with delight. The nanny tested the water carefully, ensuring it was neither too hot nor too cold, before lowering the child into the tub. The girl splashed, sending droplets across the tiled floor, while the nanny laughed softly, her crisp uniform dampening at the edges. For those moments, it was as though the world beyond the bathroom door did not exist. There were no rules, no stern reminders of boundaries, no tension pressing down from the man who paid her wages. There was only care, pure and unshaken. When the girl was finally tucked into bed, her small hand still clinging to the nanny's, she whispered, "Don't go." And though the nanny had a list of chores waiting in the halls below, she stayed a moment longer, stroking the child's hair until sleep overtook her. In that quiet, beneath the weight of chandeliers and wealth, it was clear who the little girl truly belonged to in her heart. The millionaire had a mansion. But the young black nanny had something far more powerful, the child's trust. The echo of footsteps on polished marble was the first sign he was near. The young black nanny straightened instinctively, smoothing her apron as the millionaire strode into the hall, his eyes scanning the nursery door as if checking whether order had been kept in his absence. He didn't raise his voice, but every word carried weight, sharp and deliberate. "Boundaries," he reminded her, as he so often did. "You are here to care for her, not to replace what she has." His tone was cool, and though he never named it directly, she could feel the mistrust simmering just beneath the surface of every glance. The house itself seemed to mirror his need for control. Curtains drawn at precise angles, rugs aligned with corners, silverware gleaming without a spot. He expected perfection in every detail, as though the grandeur of his estate would collapse if a chair was left askew. The nanny had learned quickly that her role was not only to tend to the child, but to maintain the illusion of flawless order that reflected his pride. Yet no matter how carefully she moved, how gently she spoke, he treated her presence as both necessary and suspect, like a tool he depended on but never trusted. She felt the tension most at meals. When she guided the little girl to eat, the millionaire watched from his end of the table, his jaw tightening at the child's laughter or playful chatter. He preferred silence, decorum, the kind of composure he believed would mold his daughter into a reflection of his legacy. The nanny's warmth unsettled that vision, and though he never said it outright, she sensed his fear that affection could unravel discipline. When the girl clung to her hand instead of his eyes hardened, though he looked away quickly, unwilling to show the sting. The staff whispered in quiet corners about his strictness, how no one ever measured up to his standards. Gardeners, cooks, even tutors had come and gone, dismissed over minor infractions or imagined slights. The nanny knew her place in that unspoken rotation. One wrong step, one moment perceived as overstepping, and she could be sent away. Yet every evening, when the girl's arms wrapped tightly around her neck, she made a silent promise not to let his rigid walls smother the child's need for warmth. The tension thickened whenever the little girl's affection crossed the invisible line he had drawn. If she called for the nanny in the night instead of him, his disapproval showed in a clipped remark the next morning. If she laughed too freely at bedtime stories, he would remind the nanny curtly that frivolity distracted from discipline. And still, the girl's trust grew stronger each day, drawn not to the rules her father laid down, but to the gentle care she received in the quiet spaces he ignored. The young black nanny moved through the mansion with caution, always aware of his eyes, always aware that her position balanced on his pride. Yet beneath that careful restraint, she carried something he could not control. The bond between her and his daughter deepened with every touch, every smile, every whispered story. Boundaries were his obsession. But for the child, those boundaries dissolved the moment she felt the steady hands of the woman who cared for her as no rulebook ever could. The child's whimpers cut through the quiet halls, sharper than any scolding or order the millionaire had ever barked. The young black nanny hurried to her side, laying a hand against her small forehead. Heat radiated beneath her palm, her cheeks flushed, her body restless. The little girl tossed and turned, her voice breaking into shallow cries that seemed to pull at every corner of the room. The mansion, with all its gold trimmings and polished marble, felt powerless against something so simple as a fever. Memories rose unbidden in the nanny's mind. Long nights from her own childhood, when her mother's voice would hum through the darkness, steady and soft as warm water lapped against her skin. Those baths had been a medicine no bottle could match. The comfort of touch and care woven into steam and gentle hands. Standing in the millionaire's home, far from her own, she realized she carried those lessons with her still. She moved quickly but quietly, filling the tub with warm water, testing it with her wrist until it was just right. Steam curled up to fog the edges of the mirror. She hummed, without thinking, the same melody her mother had once sung, a tune older than her fears. The sound filled the tiled walls, softening them, making the cavernous bathroom feel less like a stranger's place and more like a sanctuary. The little girl clutched her stuffed toy even as her breathing grew ragged. The nanny knelt beside her, brushing damp curls from her forehead. "It's all right," she whispered, lifting her gently. The child did not resist. She leaned into the arms she trusted most, her small frame trembling but safe. The nanny lowered her into the warm bath, the water lapping at her skin, coaxing the fevered heat to ease. At first, the girl only whimpered, uncertain. But as the warmth wrapped around her, her shoulders loosened, and her sobs faded into quiet sighs. She dipped her fingers into the water, splashing faintly, eyes flickering toward the nanny as if searching for permission. A nod, a smile, and the child began to play, the sound of her laughter breaking through the fog of illness. The nanny's song never stopped, rising and falling with the rhythm of the water. She bathed the girl gently, careful to move slowly, to never jar the fragile peace that had returned. Every small smile, every sparkle of joy in the girl's tired eyes reminded her why she had made the choice. Rules and boundaries meant little in the face of a child's need for comfort. By the time the girl's eyelids drooped, her fever already easing, the bathroom no longer felt like a place of fear but of healing. The nanny wrapped her in a thick towel, cradling her against her chest. The little one nestled in, murmuring soft words that the nanny could barely hear, her trust woven into every breath. In that quiet moment, as steam lingered in the air and the house stood oblivious beyond the door, the young black nanny knew she had done what was right. She had broken no rules that mattered, only honored the oldest one she carried. When a child cries, you soothe them, no matter the cost. Steam still curled from the bath as the young black nanny lifted the little girl from the warm water. Wrapped snugly in a towel, the child clung to her neck, her damp hair plastered to her forehead, her tiny body softened by comfort and relief. The nanny held her carefully, humming faintly, prepared to carry her back to bed. But before she could take a step, the door slammed open with such force the mirror rattled against the wall. The millionaire filled the doorway, his expensive suit sharp against the haze of steam, his face twisting in disbelief and fury. His voice boomed against the tiled walls, harsh and echoing, "What are you doing with my daughter?" The words cracked like a whip, freezing the air more effectively than any chill from the drafty house. The nanny's heart jolted into her throat. She instinctively pulled the child closer, as if to shield her from the blast of anger radiating from her father. The girl whimpered softly, burying her face in the nanny's shoulder, her small arms gripping tighter. The sound only deepened the silence that followed, a silence thick with judgment, tension, and fear. For a moment, the nanny couldn't find her voice. Her chest rose and fell too quickly, her mind scrambling to explain. She wanted to tell him about the fever, the tears, the soft cries of discomfort that had led her to fill the bath. She wanted to remind him of the years her own mother had done the same for her, of the comfort in simple human care. But the words stuck, and in their absence, his assumptions filled the void. His eyes burned with accusation, seeing not a young woman doing what compassion demanded, but an overstep, a trespass into his authority. Behind him, shadows moved, members of the staff drawn by the commotion. Their faces lingered in the hallway, half hidden but wide-eyed, whispering behind their hands. The walls of the mansion, so used to muffling secrets, now seemed to amplify every sound, every heartbeat, every accusation unspoken but understood. The little girl stirred against her, whispering faintly, "I feel better." But the father didn't hear it, or perhaps didn't want to. His gaze stayed fixed on the nanny, unrelenting, as though her very existence was an affront to the order he tried to maintain. He stepped closer, his shoes clicking sharply against the marble, the towel in her arms trembling with the girl's shifting weight. The young nanny straightened her back despite the pounding in her chest. She would not crumble in front of him. She clutched the child with both arms, the towel pressed close, her own fear clashing against the instinct to protect. The steam hung between them, thick and suffocating. But so did the truth. She had done nothing wrong except care when he had not. The air crackled with the moment, stretched taut like glass ready to shatter. The child whimpered again. The father's fury swelled louder, and the young black nanny stood caught between them. Every heartbeat a reminder that compassion had brought her here and that it might cost her everything. The millionaire's voice filled the bathroom like a storm breaking loose. His accusations came sharp and fast, each word slamming against the young black nanny with the force of a hammer. He demanded to know who had given her permission, who had told her she could take such liberties, who had authorized her to touch his daughter in a way he hadn't decreed. His tone dripped with disdain, as though her very presence in that moment was an act of rebellion rather than care. The nanny's breath caught in her chest, but she tried to speak, her voice trembling but steady enough to form words. She explained the child had been restless, fevered, her little body shaking with discomfort, and that she had remembered what her own mother used to do in such moments. A warm bath, soothing, safe. It was instinct, care, humanity. But her words fell into the rising tide of his fury, drowned out before they could take root. Outside the bathroom, the sounds had drawn others, footsteps shuffled against the polished floors. Staff members, faces half hidden in the shadows of the hall, lingered at the threshold, whispering to one another in quick, nervous tones. Their eyes flicked between the millionaire's fury and the nanny's desperate calm, none of them daring to step in, none of them bold enough to bridge the widening gulf between accusation and truth. The little girl clung tighter, the towel slipping slightly as her damp arms looped around the nanny's neck. Her soft cheek pressed against the nanny's collarbone, her tiny body trembling more from the shouts than from fever. The child's grip told the truth. No one else seemed willing to speak. She trusted this young woman, leaned into her comfort, needed her in that moment. The millionaire's face was flushed with anger. His jaw clenched so tightly the veins stood out at his temples. He saw only betrayal, imagined disrespect, the breaking of boundaries he had carved so carefully into the walls of his house. His wealth and authority gave him the confidence to believe his word was enough to define what was right and what was wrong, even when evidence to the contrary clung to the nanny's arms and buried its face against her chest. Her heart pounded. She knew her position, how fragile it was, how easily suspicion could be twisted into guilt. The weight of his power pressed down like stone. Yet still, she didn't loosen her hold on the girl. She didn't put her down. Even as her own voice cracked, she tried again, telling him the girl had asked for comfort, that her fever had eased in the bath, that she had only wanted to soothe her. But again, his fury crashed over her words, making them feel small, insignificant, disposable. Every whisper outside the door carried the same question, not whether she was right, but whether she would survive this moment at all. The air thickened, heavy with fear. And still, the girl's small hands clung tighter, as though she already knew that in this storm of rage and accusation, the young black nanny was the only anchor she had. The room was trembling with the weight of his accusations when a smaller, softer voice cut through the air. The little girl, still damp and wrapped in the towel, lifted her head from the young black nanny's shoulder. Her cheeks were streaked with tears, her breath shaky, but her words came out with startling clarity. She said she had wanted the bath. She said it had made her feel better. And then she said the one thing no one could ignore, that she trusted the nanny. The silence that followed was like glass breaking. Every murmur in the hall vanished. The staff outside froze, their whispers dying mid-breath. Even the millionaire's fury faltered, his booming voice collapsing into nothing as his daughter's trembling declaration filled the space he once commanded. The young nanny stood still, her arms tight around the child, her heart pounding as the truth poured from lips too small to carry such weight, yet strong enough to shift the entire balance of the room. The millionaire's face twisted as he tried to process it. Pride clashed with shock, anger with doubt. His jaw opened, but no words came. For all his control, for all his rules, he could not silence his own daughter. The bond he saw before him, his child pressed against the nanny, refusing to let go, was undeniable. It was not built on defiance, not on disobedience, but on something he had not given her in years: tenderness, presence, care that was not bound by contracts or schedules. The girl sniffled again, looking up at him, her small voice repeating that she trusted her nanny, trusted her more than anyone else. The words cut deeper than the accusations he had hurled minutes earlier. They exposed a truth he could not escape, a truth that made his position at the doorway suddenly feel weak and hollow. The staff who had gathered exchanged glances, not daring to speak, but their eyes told the rest. They had all seen it, the child's comfort blooming in the nanny's presence, her health already steadied by her care. Their silence wasn't fear anymore. It was agreement. They had witnessed something real, something stronger than the millionaire's rage. For the first time, he noticed the details he had ignored. The way his daughter's breathing had steadied, the flush of fever fading under the nanny's watch, the way her little hands dug into the fabric of the nanny's clothes, as if anchoring herself, the way the young woman, accused and cornered, had not once let the child go. The authority in the room shifted in that instant. It was no longer his voice that held power, but the quiet insistence of a child who had chosen who she trusted most. The young black nanny stood, shoulders squared, not in triumph, but in dignity, knowing she had done nothing wrong. And the millionaire, for all his wealth and power, was left with the one truth money could not buy or command: the bond between his daughter and the woman who had cared for her when he could not. The millionaire's anger dissolved into a heavy silence, the kind that lingered long after his voice stopped echoing off the bathroom tiles. Pride burned in him still, his jaw tight, his shoulders rigid, but he could not erase what he had just witnessed. The image of his daughter clinging desperately to the young black nanny, her tiny arms wrapped around her as if she were the only anchor in the world, unsettled him more than his own rage ever could. For years, he had commanded this house with rules, money, and fear of disobedience, but in a single moment, his authority had been quietly overshadowed by something he could neither buy nor control: trust. From that night forward, the air in the mansion changed in ways so subtle at first that only the staff noticed. The little girl no longer hesitated when she was upset or frightened. She did not run to her father, nor did she cower behind the grand furniture of the house. Instead, she went straight to the nanny, her small hand slipping into hers, her eyes filled with unspoken reliance. It was as natural as breathing, and no one dared to question it anymore. The staff, once wary of the millionaire's strict rules, now exchanged quiet nods and glances, recognizing that the balance of power had shifted. The millionaire, though he said nothing, began to retreat into observation. At dinner, he would watch his daughter laugh at the nanny's playful whispers. At night, he would hear the soft lull of the nanny's voice carrying down the halls as she told bedtime stories. He did not interrupt. He did not forbid it. He simply let it happen, swallowing his pride each time he saw the bond deepen. The humiliation of that night remained fresh, but it was tempered by the undeniable comfort his child now carried with her. For the first time in years, she looked alive, secure, less haunted by loneliness. The nanny herself did not change her steps. She did her work as she always had, steady, careful, respectful, but now her presence carried more weight. She was no longer invisible in the grand rooms of marble and glass. Her voice, once softened to avoid offense, became a thread of calm running through the house. The other staff began to follow her lead, looking to her not as a servant among them, but as the one closest to the child who mattered most. The millionaire resisted, but not with shouts or commands anymore. His resistance came in silence, in tightened fists on the armrest of his chair, in long glances that betrayed his struggle to accept what he could not undo. He had once screamed to assert his control, but his voice now seemed smaller, unnecessary. For all his wealth, all his walls and rules, the person his daughter trusted most was the young black nanny who had broken through where he could not. And though he would never admit it aloud, the house itself began to move in her rhythm. The nights no longer echoed with tension, but with quiet stories and a child's laughter. The millionaire remained a figure of wealth and pride, but she was the one his daughter reached for first. In that simple truth, the mansion no longer belonged only to him. It belonged to the bond that had silenced his scream and reshaped his home forever.